Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the early betting lines. As you can see, we definitely had some very interesting ones. Texas favored by 3.5 at Michigan is quite an interesting one. A&M being favored over what is likely one of the top five, top six teams in the country, and Notre Dame is another one. But let's jump into the most important players for the title contenders this upcoming year. We did Georgia, Texas, Oregon, Bama, and Ohio State. That was the fifth team. So the top five teams that I have up top of my top five teams in the country. And now let's go a little bit further down the path, but not far by any means. And let's go to the next group on this list. And let's start with Ole Miss, and it's all about Chris Paul Jr. This guy is super important to what this team is going to be this upcoming year. I think when you look at him at face value, there's so many big time players on this Ole Miss defense. There's no two ways about that. I think when you have Walter Nolan, when you have Princely Umanmielen, when you have so many different guys, I actually put in Walter Nolan here for a second before switching my way over to Chris Paul Jr. So I'm definitely someone that there's a lot of people that need to step up. But whenever I look at a defense that has a lot of moving pieces, that has a lot of people that need to step into bigger roles, I always look at for where the green dot guy is going to be, where the leader of that defense, the center of that defense is going to be, and I think it's going to be Chris Paul Jr. I think he's going to be hugely important to this team's success on the field, but also I think when you look at some of the other guys on this team, there are younger guys that could absolutely make a big time leap this upcoming year, and when you have a guy that's played as much good football as Chris Paul Jr. has, I think you only benefit from that. So Sunshine Perkins is someone that I'm watching very closely to just become a little bit more polished, I suppose. He has elite athleticism, can do remarkable things on the football field, but I think if he was a little bit better at diagnosing plays, was a little bit better at using that athleticism, not just, as a failsafe, but using it the correct way and kind of channeling it the right way, would definitely be make him a just remarkable player for Ole Miss going forward. So I think when you look at this Ole Miss team, the pieces are there. There's no two questions about that. They did an incredible job in the portal, adding all the guys that they needed to add, doing some of the things that they needed to do. But the reality is, you got to bring them all together. And usually, you would lean on the defensive coordinators to do that in practice, but once you get on the field, it's going to be up to whatever guy is getting that voice in his ear, whatever guy is the communicator. And I can't imagine they would look any further than Chris Paul Jr., a red shirt junior, played a lot of football, SEC football at Arkansas. So I would lean that that's the guy that gets everything in order. And if they are a really good defense, that could be a guy that you look to as maybe the reason for them being as good as they are. So that's a fascinating guy to watch. Another linebacker that I'm watching very closely is Harold Perkins. He is someone that, to me, this one was an absolute layup. When you look at this LSU defense, there's not a lot of dudes. Now, there's good players, don't get me wrong. I think Javian Toviano is going to be an awesome player this upcoming year. I think Javian Suggs is going to be a great player they brought in from Grand Valley State. But the reality is, it all starts and ends with this guy. If he can be an elite player, they can be a really good defense. If they don't put him in the situations that he, was put in a year ago, he can be very successful, and this team can be a really remarkable squad. And I think people, including myself, to be totally honest with you, kind of forgot how good this guy was in his freshman year when he had a defensive staff that put him in position to succeed and put him in the places where he needs to be, which essentially is kind of wherever. You can put him wherever you want, but also there are right ways to use him. There are definitely ways that you need to utilize him in the field, and I think Blake Baker is going to be incredible at doing that. So when I look at this LSU defense, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of holes, and there's a lot of players that you don't really know what you're going to get from. Harold Perkins is a guy that I feel pretty confident as long as you put him in the position that he needs to be put in, he's going to succeed, and he's going to do really remarkable things, and I would not be surprised by any means if he was on an All-SEC team at the end of the year, possibly the first All-SEC team this time next year. So he's someone that I think LSU's defense right now, I think, is not going to be great. I do think it'll be passable. Now, if Harold Perkins can be the player that, is inside of him and unlock all of his ability, they could be a team that could contend for the SEC. That's how much of a difference maker this guy can be, especially at that linebacker position. So I think he's going to be fascinating to watch. The ability is a piece of this puzzle. The leadership of all these guys that are coming in or young guys that are stepping up is going to be huge as well. So I think when we look at LSU, you look at the defense, obviously, first and foremost, but Harold Perkins is really the guy that is going to make this defense go one way or the other, if I'm being totally honest. So very, very fascinating player. One of my favorite players in the entire country, if I'm being totally honest. But let's move on to Utah, and let's talk about Dorian Singer. This is a guy that is very, very talented. I think there's not a lot of questions I have about the Utah defense, just because Kyle Whittingham is in that room. I don't worry about teams in Utah having a good defense because the way that he's been going about business has been ironclad on the defensive side of the ball for quite some time. So I'm not really going to question him. I'm not really going to say that they need any one big time defensive player to step up because they've always been incredible about, adapting to circumstances and putting guys in position to succeed and doing all the things that you need to do on the defensive side of the ball. Now, when you look at the offensive side of the ball, you have a couple of worries, and I think they're much less than you had probably a year ago, especially with Cam Rising being out. But even beyond that, I think I had more worries about this offense than I do right now, and I think a big reason for that is Dorian Singer. When I look at the receivers that Utah has had over the past, 5 years, I don't think any of them come close to what Dorian Singer can be. He is someone that I think is remarkably talented, has transferred a couple of times in his career, was at Arizona, then USC, now over at Utah. But the reality is this kid can play, and he can do really, really remarkable things on the football field. And it sounds like him and Cam Rising already have a very good rapport passing the ball. So he's one of those guys that I think when you talk about the Big 12, you talk about Tutoria McMillan, you talk about Isaiah Bond, all of these remarkable, that's not a Big 12 receiver, you talk about a lot of remarkable receivers in the Big 12. I think Dorian Singer could be the best of the bunch. I think he could be a guy that totally busts the door down and is right next to Tutoria McMillan as one of the all Big 12 players at that position. So I think he's going to be fascinating to watch. I think he could be the difference between them just, going to the Big 12 championship to winning it and going to the playoff and possibly winning a playoff game in that time. So I think he's a hugely important guy. I think he could take Utah from great to elite this upcoming season, depending on the season that he has. This next guy is a little bit different. He comes from Penn State. It's Caden Saunders. Now, Caden Saunders is not going to be the wide receiver one over there at Penn State. Julian Fleming will absolutely be the guy that is the go-to one for this team, but when you talk about Penn State, there is a ton of new stuff. You have new coordinators, new guys going off to the NFL, guys coming into the program like Julian Fleming. So there's a ton of moving parts, but the wide receiver room is by far the most worrisome on this team. I think comfortably, I think Penn State fans would tell you that for sure. Losing Keandre Lambert-Smith really put a wrench into this because going into the year, Julian Fleming at the 1, Keandre Lambert-Smith at the 2, Caden Saunders at the 3, it's not necessarily, Ohio State level or Texas level or anything crazy, but it is a really solid group, and it's a group that could definitely get you a number of different places, especially if Andy Kotelnicki can get them open and put them in great positions. So I tend to think that was going to be an okay setup. Now, Keandre Lambert-Smith is now an Auburn Tiger, so you have to deal with Caden Saunders taking a step up into that wide receiver 2 role, and he's going to be hugely important for this team. They can't just lean on Julian Fleming, partly because he's not necessarily the biggest body. He's not necessarily a guy that can take all of the hits in the world and keep moving. So you're going to need to spread out the ball, and you're going to need to go to the tight ends. They have a couple of very talented guys there as well. So this passing game will be multiple. They'll have tons of running back passing game. They'll have tons of tight ends involved. But at the end of the day, you need wide receivers outside that can make plays. And Caden Saunders is a guy that has not quite hit the ceiling, I suppose, that Penn State fans had for him. But the reality is he really could this upcoming season and be a huge reason that they maybe make a run at the Big 12. So it's going to be really fascinating to watch this one. I think you have big-time questions about this wide receiver core, but if Caden Saunders can make things happen this upcoming year, I think a lot of that would go away. And then let's finish it off with another wide receiver. Why don't we? Let's talk about Tyler Morris over there at Michigan. This is all about Michigan being at a position where you lose Roman Wilson, you lose Cornelius Johnson, you lose two guys that are hugely important to what you do, mostly because they know exactly where to be and when to be there. They had this ability to always be open, to always have, a fail safe for JJ McCarthy to go to, and not having that is absolutely huge. Now, Tyler Morris is a guy that could absolutely step up into that void, I suppose, and definitely be a guy that a lot of people are shocked by this upcoming year. I think when you look at Alex Orji and you worry about his throwing ability, that's definitely not his asset coming in. You need a go-to guy. You need a guy that is going to be sure-handed, that's going to be a great route runner, that's going to do the things that you need him to do, and also, when you get the ball in his hands, can do special things. So I think when you look at this Michigan offense, it's going to be a lot of running the ball. There's no two ways about that. They're going to be able to run the ball, but I do think this pass game likely falls a lot on the shoulders of the receivers to make plays after the catch for Morris and Morgan and a lot of other guys that they'll have contribute here and there. Colston Loveland, another piece of this, that definitely will be a big-time part of this offense, but they need an alpha. They need a guy in that wide receiver room that is going to be the go-to guy no matter what, and I tend to think that is going to be Tyler Morris, and I think honestly, he could be better than the two guys that just left. It just might take him a little bit of time to get there. So, very, very fascinating players. I think all of those guys will have so much to say about what their teams can do this upcoming season. But we're going to take our last break here. And when we come back, we're going to get into a Hot Take Thursday. Frankly, I think this is the hottest one that I've had on this entire show since I've started it. We had one around the ACC title game that is going to be a little bit hard to sell, but I'm going to do my darn best right after this, so stick with us.